In 49 BC, a triumphant general stood at the edge of a small, unassuming river called the Rubicon. Before him lay Italy, the heart of the Roman Republic. Behind him stood a legion of hardened soldiers, men who had fought with him, bled with him, and were loyal to him above all else. That man was Gaius Julius Caesar. Fresh from his conquest of Gaul, Caesar was at the height of his power. His name carried weight across the Roman world. To the people, he was a hero, a conqueror, a protector, a symbol of strength. But inside the Senate, that same reputation stirred something very different: fear. The guardians of the Republic did not see a hero. They saw a man who had grown too powerful, too popular, and too dangerous to control. Their command to him was simple, but deadly in its implication. Caesar was ordered to disband his army, relinquish his authority, and return to Rome as a private citizen. On the surface, it sounded lawful. In reality, it was a trap. Stripped of his power, he would be vulnerable to prosecution, or worse, at the hands of his political enemies, led by his former ally, Pompey the Great. Caesar understood exactly what this meant. He was left with only two choices: submit and face certain ruin, or defy the Senate and ignite a civil war that could tear Rome apart. As his soldiers watched in silence, waiting for his decision, Caesar chose defiance. He led his army across the Rubicon, breaking a sacred law that forbade any general from entering Italy with troops. In that single moment, the fate of the Republic was sealed. The die, as he declared, was cast. What followed was swift, relentless, and unforgiving. Caesar moved with precision and brilliance, chasing Pompey and the forces of the Senate across the Roman world. From Spain to Greece, the conflict raged until it culminated in a decisive confrontation at the Battle of Pharsalus. There, Caesar's tactical genius overwhelmed Pompey's forces, shattering the last organized resistance against him. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping to find refuge. Instead, he was betrayed and assassinated on the orders of the young king, Ptolemy XIII. When Caesar arrived and was presented with Pompey's severed head, it was not triumph he felt, but shock. His greatest rival had been eliminated, but not by his own hand. With Pompey gone, there was no one left to challenge him. Caesar returned to Rome not just as a victor, but as its undisputed master. The Senate, now powerless, had little choice but to honor him. He was named dictator, first temporarily, then for life. He held titles that elevated him above every other man in Rome. And yet, Caesar did not rule idly. He introduced sweeping reforms that reshaped the Republic. He reorganized the calendar, distributed land to his veterans, and extended Roman citizenship to people across the provinces. To many, these were necessary and visionary changes, but to others, they were deeply unsettling. Because Caesar was no longer acting like a servant of the Republic, he was beginning to look and behave like a king. Among those who grew increasingly uneasy were men who had once stood by his side. Senators who believed they were defending Rome from tyranny began to whisper in secret. At the center of this growing conspiracy stood Marcus Junius Brutus, a man torn between personal loyalty and political conviction. Then came the Ides of March. In 44 BC, ignoring warnings and omens, Caesar entered the theater of Pompey for a meeting of the Senate. The conspirators gathered around him under the pretense of presenting a petition. Then, without warning, the attack began. Daggers were drawn. Blades struck again and again. Caesar resisted at first, struggling against the assault. But then he saw a face he did not expect: Brutus. In that moment, something shifted. According to tradition, he spoke words that would echo through history. "You too, my child?" Then he fell, collapsing at the base of Pompey's statue, his blood staining the very institution he had come to dominate. The conspirators believed they had saved the Republic. They called themselves liberators. But instead of restoring order, their actions shattered what remained of stability. Rome was thrown into chaos once again. Out of that chaos emerged an unlikely figure, a young, sickly 19-year-old named Gaius Octavius. At the time of Caesar's assassination, he was far from Rome, studying in Greece. But everything changed when Caesar's will was read. In it, Octavius was named as his adopted son and sole heir. Overnight, he became Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. Despite his youth and inexperience, Octavian acted with remarkable precision. He returned to Italy, determined not only to claim his inheritance, but to step into Caesar's legacy. In Rome, he found a city divided and unstable. Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted lieutenant, had already seized control and viewed Octavian as nothing more than an inexperienced boy. But Octavian proved to be far more dangerous than anyone expected. Using the wealth left to him by Caesar, he fulfilled the promises made in his adoptive father's will, winning the loyalty of the Roman people and, more importantly, the veterans of Caesar's army. Slowly but surely, he began to build power. To confront the assassins, Brutus and Cassius, a new alliance was formed. Octavian joined forces with Mark Antony and Lepidus, creating what became known as the Second Triumvirate. Together, they launched a brutal campaign of proscriptions, executing thousands of perceived enemies and consolidating control over Rome. Their combined forces marched east and met the armies of the conspirators at the Battle of Philippi. There, Brutus and Cassius were defeated, bringing an end to the immediate threat against Caesar's legacy. But with their common enemy gone, the fragile alliance between Octavian and Antony began to fracture. The Roman world was divided. Octavian took control of the West, while Antony governed the wealthy eastern provinces. It was in the East that Antony's fate would take a decisive turn. In the city of Tarsus, he summoned Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. He intended to question her loyalty. Instead, he found himself captivated. Cleopatra did not arrive as a subject, but as a queen of immense power and presence. Their alliance quickly evolved into something far deeper, one of the most famous relationships in history. But in Rome, this relationship became a weapon. Octavian understood the power of perception. He launched a calculated campaign of propaganda, portraying Antony not as a Roman leader, but as a man corrupted by a foreign queen. He painted him as weak, indulgent, and disloyal to Rome itself. Public opinion began to shift. Tension escalated into open conflict. The final break came when Octavian revealed Antony's will to the Senate, exposing his intentions to favor Cleopatra and their children. Outrage swept through Rome. War was declared, officially against Cleopatra, but in truth, against Antony. In 31 BC, the two sides clashed at the Battle of Actium, a decisive naval confrontation off the coast of Greece. Octavian's forces, commanded by the brilliant General Agrippa, outmaneuvered Antony's fleet. The battle turned into a disaster. Realizing the situation was lost, Antony and Cleopatra fled, abandoning their forces to defeat. The end came swiftly. As Octavian's armies advanced on Egypt, Antony, believing all hope was gone, took his own life. Cleopatra, now alone and facing humiliation in Rome, made her own final decision. Refusing to be paraded as a symbol of defeat, she chose death, according to legend, by the bite of a poisonous serpent. With their deaths, the last resistance to Octavian vanished. He returned to Rome as the undisputed ruler of the Roman world. The long years of civil war had finally come to an end. But Octavian understood something crucial. Rome had rejected kings before. Power had to be presented carefully. In 27 BC, in a carefully orchestrated display, he offered to restore authority to the Senate. They refused. Instead, they granted him a new title, Augustus, meaning the revered one. It was the beginning of something entirely new. The Roman Republic, which had endured for centuries, was effectively over. Though its institutions remained in name, real power now rested in the hands of a single man, Augustus Caesar. The Roman Empire had begun. And Augustus would rule for over 40 years, ushering in a period of stability and prosperity known as the Pax Romana. What began at a quiet river with a single decision had reshaped the course of history. The fall of the Republic was not sudden. It was the result of ambition, loyalty, betrayal, and war. But from its collapse rose one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. And it all started at the Rubicon. And this is the story of how Rome became an empire that would shape the world and rule for generations. Thank you for watching.